On May 8th, Taiwan's cabinet approved a 4-year plan to spend 8.8 billion NT dollars, or 290.6 million US dollars, to strengthen the country's cybersecurity resilience. It goes without saying that cybersecurity plays a key role in Taiwan's major scientific and technological innovation policies, information security, and national security. And according to head of the Administration for Cybersecurity Tai Fulong, the money will be used to strengthen the information and communication security of Taiwan's critical infrastructure and enhance its defense mechanisms. According to the report by Focus Taiwan, the national news agency, the critical infrastructure spans at least 6 sectors: energy, water resources, transportation, communications, healthcare, and welfare and finance. Now, why is Taiwan spending so much money? To protect its digital infrastructure. You're listening to The Divide. My name is Iris Xu. Today I'm speaking with someone who knows how important it is for a country to establish good cybersecurity governance that respects the right to freedom of expression and access to information.
Michael Castor. I'm the head of the Global China program at Article 19.
Michael is a human rights advocate and researcher specializing in China and Southeast Asia. At Article 19, an organization that propels the freedom of expression movement locally and globally to ensure all people realize the power of their voices, Michael manages projects on internet freedom and digital rights. Recently, Article 19 released a new report revealing how China is expanding its digital authoritarian model of cybersecurity governance across the Indo-Pacific, posing a grave threat to people's rights regionally and globally.
This report is the second in a series that we've been doing looking at the digital Silk Road and cooperation between China on digital infrastructure in the Indo-Pacific and sort of how that has led to the expansion, the adoption of particularly authoritarian models of digital governance. And so in this report, we took a deep dive into particularly digital governance of cybersecurity. And in 3 parts, the first part of the report really tries to ground our understanding in what are China's digital governance laws, policies, institutions, and norms pertaining to cybersecurity. The second part of the report looks at 3 country case studies in the Indo-Pacific: Indonesia, Pakistan, and Vietnam. And then the third part of the report sort of introduces and analyzes a little bit about Taiwan's model of cybersecurity governance, partly to raise awareness of what Taiwan is doing, and also really to sort of make the argument that it is a more rights-based, or it's a better practice to counteract what China is promoting in the region and really globally.
Wait a minute, what is the practice that China is promoting?
In the region, we see how a lot of countries have learned from China's cybersecurity law in developing and implementing their own. And we can get to that in a moment. But some of the really concerning elements within cybersecurity law are these issues around an emphasis on data localization, real name registration, the retention of so-called sensitive information by service providers or tech companies and others, but also that the requirement that they hand that information over to the authorities, that they monitor it, so preemptive censorship and surveillance concerns. It also includes an article that basically tries to legalize internet shutdowns or network shutdowns, and we've really seen how that also has been weaponized in the region and in around the world. But the cybersecurity law doesn't exist in a vacuum, obviously. It's 2017, a lot has happened since then. In fact, there are plans right now to amend the cybersecurity law. So this year, in fact, the National People's Congress has said that they plan to do some amendments to that. But what we've also seen is through the national intelligence law, the data security law, personal information protection law, so a number of others, and then regulations, building out this larger framework on digital governance that brings in elements of cybersecurity that really are centered around or based around centralizing censorship and surveillance under the sort of totalitarian digital authority of the Chinese Communist Party. as that probably makes sense. It sounds to say none of these legal provisions adhere to international human rights law. They're very concerning and very problematic, and they've been discussed and analyzed, obviously, by many others over the years.
This report focused on cybersecurity with Chinese characteristics. And here's Michael explaining how China's repressive cybersecurity norms came about and how they are implemented.
After looking at the laws and policies, we also really wanted to try and understand what are some of the main institutions responsible for digital governance and cybersecurity in China. And while there's obviously many, what we really looked at are 4 core institutions, 3 that are under the State Council and 1 that's under the Central Committee. So really kind of 3 state and 1 party institution. Of the 3 state institutions, we looked at the National Development and Reform Commission, which is really the most powerful of the state council bodies, and among its responsibilities it includes like promoting technical innovation, strategic industry development, but really around setting 5-year economic development planning and things like this. The Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, it regulates telecommunications, software, information technology, manufacturing, things like this. The MIIT also is one of the main institutions through which China participates in things like the International Telecommunications Union and other sort of international technical standards or internet or digital governance setting bodies. And then finally, also, we identified, of course, the role that the Ministry of Public Security has for, enforcing some of the criminalization around banning VPNs and some of these other things, and its role, obviously, in enforcing some of the Great Firewall and other censorship aspects. But the core institution that we looked at, and I would say really the institution that's of most relevance and of most concern in these conversations, of course, would be the Cyberspace Administration of China. And because it has risen in such a way where originally in 2011, when it was sort of created as the State Internet Information Office, it's risen, especially since 2018 with the major party state reshuffling at the Congress that year. What we've seen is that the Cyberspace Administration of China has risen from, this sort of small fringe internet regulatory body to a supra-regulatory institution under the party itself, which gives it incredible reach and incredible influence. Among the elements that it's responsible for, cybersecurity development, but also like international cooperation and partnerships. And one thing also, I think, when we're talking about new and emerging technologies, the Cyberspace Administration of China is also one of the key sort of regulatory bodies on setting guidelines for public-facing generative AI and things like this, which then brings in a lot of the securitization of the information space. And I think one of the points that we try to emphasize in this report too that doesn't necessarily get as much attention or consideration as we argue it should, is that while the Cyberspace Administration of China, or the CAC, is discussed within narratives around digital governance and policy making, its constituent association with the Central Propaganda Department doesn't get discussed as much at the same time. And so again, going back to its origins, the State Internet Information Office was part of the Central Propaganda Department. This sort of, two labeling with the public-facing name and a sort of internal, party designation. And this has remained throughout as the CAC has evolved in its sort of internet supra-regulatory functions. It's maintained its affiliation with the Central Propaganda Department, so that, in fact, the head of the Cyberspace Administration now also remains as the deputy head of the Central Propaganda Department. And this is really critical, we argue, because as the CAC is involved in pushing out various regulations on the control of the information infrastructure, laws and policies on critical information infrastructure or other elements of cybersecurity, when there's information flows, it also has a dual role of information control or propagandizing. And so this is really important then when we talk about promoting China's norms in cybersecurity or other digital governance, because we're talking really then about not just about, say, information security, but the dissemination of information security as hand in hand with information control as fundamental to these types of digital governance, laws, policies, and norms that China is promoting domestically and internationally.
The CAC that Michael is talking about, or the Cyberspace Administration of China, traces its origin to the CCP's propaganda system. And if you go on their website, the first thing that you see is the typical Chinese-style policy promotion mixed with praises for their leader, and how Xi Jinping is strengthening confidence to promote high-quality development and high-efficiency government, etc. And to my horror, there's a press release issued on May 21st, 2025, and the title is, "The 2025, quote, Strive to be a Good Female Internet User, unquote, theme event was launched." It says, "We must build a solid ideological foundation and persist in using Xi Jinping thoughts on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era to unite hearts and build souls. We must encourage the majority of female netizens to bravely shoulder the mission of the time and strive to be builders of great undertakings." What does that even mean? Now going back to the Article 19 report, which is titled Cybersecurity with Chinese Characteristics, Digital Governance in the Indo-Pacific and the Taiwanese Alternative, the CAC is powered by the data security law that claims extraterritoriality in the name of data sovereignty. The law states that when data is handled outside of China in a way that harms national security, public interest, or the lawful rights and interests of citizens or organizations of the PRC, determines that China may pursue legal liability. Now, this piece of extremely vague and overtly broad legislation is giving grounds for China to justify reprisal should foreign regulators attempt to limit China. Join Michael and I next week to find out what digital norms with Chinese characteristics look like.
And again, people might argue, push back, what about this, something like this, but kind of we just, we settled on like a 3-part sort of typology of norms.
This episode of The Divide is produced by Radio Taiwan International.